So hi everyone, and welcome to the MLOps Live webinar series, where we discuss how to implement AI and GenAI to bring data science into real business applications. My name is Sahar, and I'm the VP of Marketing at Iguazio, which was acquired by McKinsey last year. I'm delighted to welcome you to the first MLOps Live webinar of 2024. And boy, do we have a great session planned for you all today. GenAI has taken the world over by storm with the introduction of ChatGPT, Microsoft CodePilot, Midjourney, Stable Diffusion, and so many other incredible tools that we couldn't have even dreamed of a year and a half ago. But with the great promise of AI comes real challenges when it comes to implementation, especially in the enterprise, and even more so when it comes to financial services. Risk, compliance, data privacy, and escalating costs are just a few of the all too real concerns that we're hearing from our clients all the time. So on today's webinar, we're going to break this topic down for you, explain the challenges of GenAI specifically, and also how some of the leading organizations today are tackling these challenges and implementing GenAI successfully in their business environments. And to help walk us through these topics, I'm pleased to have with me today our friend and colleague, Larry Lerner. Larry is a McKinsey partner who leads the global banking and securities analytics practice, including the Global GenAI Task Force. Joining him is our very own Yaron Haviv, co-founder and CTO of Iguazio, and author of newly published book, Implementing MLOps in the Enterprise by O'Reilly. Before I hand it over to Larry to get us started, just a few quick housekeeping rules. At the end of the session, we'll hold a live Q&A where you can ask your speakers any question you may have on the topic of today's presentation. Feel free to ask your questions in the Q&A panel at the bottom of your screen, and we'll do our best to get to them all at the interactive Q&A session at the end of the talk. During the session, we'll run 2 short polls to hear from you about your GenAI journey, so please do fill those in. These polls help us make these sessions as valuable as possible for you, and as always, we'll make sure to share the results with you all at the end. Finally, I'd like to invite you to join over 1,000 data science practitioners on the MLOps Live community. This way you can continue the conversation with us all even after the session ends, and of course with each other. We'll drop the link in the chat box now. We've put everyone on mute, and we're recording the session so that we can send it to you afterwards. You will all receive the link after the session. With that, I'll hand the mic over to Larry to get us started.
Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending where you are. It's great to be here. And thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. Maybe to start off, I want to maybe share a couple of messages that we've been evolving over the last 12 months as we have not only been researching the topic deeply, but working with hundreds of clients across the globe to not only develop GenAI capabilities, but also scale them. So a few topics to start us off. Number one, we are very much seeing a transition from companies focusing only on the use of analytical AI and machine learning to massively expanding into GenAI well beyond POCs. And it's really highlighting the power that analytics has to really transform enterprises. It's been really inspiring to see that. Number two, based on our own research, and these numbers continue to shift over time, but we think that GenAI alone, and we'll go through some of the more details later, can add an additional $200 to $300 billion of value to the banking sector globally, which is about a 20 to 30% increase over what we thought advanced analytics and AI could deliver prior to the advent of GenAI. There are no shortage of uses of GenAI at the enterprise level. We are literally tracking hundreds of these use cases being deployed across the globe. But there are a few themes that are beginning to emerge as the most interesting and the ones with the most momentum. So we'll go through those as well. Obviously, risk management is at the top of everyone's list. And clearly being able to deploy GenAI in a responsible manner is a high priority for everyone. As we wait to see what what different governing agencies are going to develop as the guardrails for GenAI, we are seeing that individual companies themselves are beginning to create their own frameworks to allow them more momentum within the space. And finally, having seen literally hundreds of POCs be stood up, the challenge that most enterprises are facing today is not one of imagination or even delivery of a POC, but actually how do you scale it within the context of a production environment, and also how do you get the type of adoption that would be required to deliver on the promise of GenAI. Next page, please. So if we take a step back and we think about where we saw the world, say about 12 months ago, we were very bullish on the usage and adoption of AI across the banking sector. In fact, we thought that there was roughly $1 trillion of value around the globe that could be delivered, incremental value that could be delivered through advanced AI and then traditional analytics. The biggest pockets, you wouldn't be surprised, were around marketing, sales, risk. But then if you go one page forward, please. With the advent of GenAI, we've seen a bit of a shift in that. We've seen about a 20 to 30% uplift. And we're really seeing that across the board, not only from a functional perspective, but also from a sector perspective. So again, GenAI is a bit of an amplifier, is a bit of an accelerator, and it's certainly adding to the tremendous value that we think analytics in general can deliver to the banking sector. Now, of course, GenAI is not something that we believe is useful or applicable in every situation. And there are lots and lots of examples where it just shouldn't be used, or it's probably not the most appropriate technique. Think about diagnosing diseases in the healthcare field. Think about high-frequency trading, with stocks and bonds. Think about actually creating final legal documents, credit scoring. These are all things that you would probably be best suited using other types of analytics and not GenAI. But we certainly see lots of other opportunities where we think GenAI has multiple uses. This is purposely meant to be a very thick page, but this is just to illustrate for you across our clients the variety of use cases that we are tracking on GenAI. And the thing that's really exciting is it really traverses the full enterprise from front office to back office. 75 or 80% of the value today is really being driven by efficiency gains. So, right smack in the middle of the page is where we're seeing a lot of very interesting momentum. But while we are tracking literally hundreds of use cases, there are 4 areas where we're seeing particularly strong momentum, not only in the way that banks are experimenting, but also in the way that they're beginning to bring some of these into production and actually generate the impact that was promised. The first of these 4, if you can go back one page quickly. The first of these 4 is these virtual experts. McKinsey itself is betting our own future on virtual experts through the advent of Lily. And we're seeing massive amounts of potential for productivity gains through the access of these virtual experts, whether internally to your own employees or externally, potentially to your customers. The second one is content generation. Anything from the acceleration of development of contracts, NDAs, first draft, risk reports, or even first draft legal drafts. We're seeing a lot of momentum being picked up by the ability to produce these first drafts. Clearly, a human in the loop is required before anything final gets delivered. But the ability to generate content, the ability to generate text, has been one of the central themes that we've seen in the last 12 months. From a customer engagement and from a service ops perspective, there's a lot of action, a lot of momentum, from full co-pilots that are standing side by side, relationship managements or customer service agents, to just synthesis tools that are enabling, everyday bankers interact better with their end customers. And then finally, and I think most visibly, is coding acceleration, the ability to use GenAI to accelerate the software development process. We are seeing massive upticks in not only the usage of a multitude of copilots in the space, but also in the way that companies are beginning to deliver those promised efficiency gains. There's lots has been written about, who are the front runners, who are the fast followers, but clearly every day we see new institutions, very publicly boast about, all the things, all the wonderful things that you're doing with GenAI. From Morgan Stanley, which was one of the original front runners, about 12 months ago, they came up with this wealth management assistant that literally took, the power of over 100,000 research report and put them at the fingertips of the wealth managers. JP Morgan has been quite active. They've recently launched their Docs LLM, which is a small language model that is designed very specifically to understand complex business documents and business forms. But they've published on a number of other things that they've been doing over the last 12 months. Bank of America and Goldman Sachs, very visibly, Goldman Sachs probably one of the front runners in code acceleration today. Broadridge, a company that many of you may not be aware of, has also been a great front runner with both Bond GPT and Ops GPT as a way to accelerate either the operations, the middle and back office operations of investment institutions, or a way to connect bond traders more seamlessly. And finally, Fidelity as well has been quite visible. So we are continuing to see momentum pick up, and we're continuing to see these front runners really take the technology from what was an experiment to actually, sort of production and hardened solutions. Now, we've learned a lot over the last 12 months. At the firm, we've already completed something like 150 different GenAI specific engagements. And what we're seeing is that the type of work and the type of use cases that are gaining momentum, with our clients are quite aligned with what we've seen in the previous couple of pages. We're seeing, lots of examples across the globe on, ops automation, on virtual experts, on code acceleration, on content generation. But we're also seeing a very distinct need for enterprises to understand what operating model they have to build to actually generate the kind of value that we're talking about. We are seeing that the technical challenge, while it's great to develop these solutions, pales in comparison to the organizational challenge that's required to drive the kind of adoption and scale the solutions to the level that's expected. I thought I would walk us through a couple of use cases that we have done recently, just to give you a bird's eye view of specifically the type of work that we're doing. We're working with a few institutions to leverage GenAI, to hyper-personalize marketing messages. Now, this is a good example that illustrates the need to involve both GenAI and traditional AI in any solution. So in the case of these institutions, a lot of the traditional AI and analytics techniques are deployed, to develop the propensity models, to develop the segmentations and the microsegmentations, to understand what time of day customers might want to be called. And then the GenAI becomes the overlay on top of that that actually generates the specific messages. We've seen in experiments, we've seen some very encouraging impact stories, not only in terms of the ability for banks to build more intimate relationships with customers, but also the increasing conversion rates that are driven by a more personal approach to marketing. In the area of service ops, we're working with a number of institutions. This one in particular has to do with a GenAI-enabled chatbot that was launched in about 7 weeks. That very quickly and seamlessly answers retail customer questions far better than the previous evolutions of the bots that were available. And what was interesting is that the lift that we've seen in terms of customer experience and in terms of the ability of the bank to interact with most customers has been about a lift of 20%. So they're able to serve more customers and do so in a more effective way. Obviously, it's early days with this specific case, and it's only being deployed to about 10% of their customers. So we very much look forward to see once 40, 50 million customers have access to it, what kind of lift the bank's going to be able to get. The next example is in coding productivity, code acceleration. This is something that I think today most institutions are either experimenting or actually doing already in production. I think the interesting thing that we're seeing in this space across many clients is that your ability to focus on the software developers that have the right level of experience is pretty critical. We have seen that the efficiency gains are mostly focused on coders that already brought in some experience. In other words, you're not going to take somebody out of college today with zero experience and all of a sudden make them a great coder. However, if you take somebody that has a good amount of coding experience, call it 3 to 5 years, and you provide them with the right GenAI tools, their performance can be massively improved. So there's still going to be a need to get coders sort of up the learning curve before they really get to see the full benefits of GenAI. Why don't we skip this one in the interest of time? We've already gone through a service ops example, and we'll have this. But what's really exciting for us, and this is something that we've made quite public, McKinsey itself is betting the future on GenAI. You can imagine the tens of thousands of knowledge documents that we might have spread across literally dozens of data stores. And what we've done over the last 12 months is we've created what we think is the world's best knowledge agent, where we have taken and built a corpus of our best knowledge documents, in the tens of thousands. We've complemented that with 30 years history of company financial data. We've complemented that with 150,000 hours of expert interviews, and we've put all of that information at the fingertips of our professionals. This is something that required a tremendous amount of change management. While it took us 4 to 5 months to build a solution, it's taken us another 4 to 5 months to responsibly deploy this across the enterprise globally. And it's something that every day we are seeing more and more adoption, as well as an incredible amount of feedback that's keeping our pipeline quite lively, as we develop new features. But for those of you that haven't seen Lily, it's been written about it, and I would encourage you to look into it because it's quite applicable to just about every industry. Now, I can't have a Gen AI discussion without talking about risk. We are seeing that, the clients that are getting the fastest, speed to production are the ones that are looking very hard from day one at the guardrails that they have to build, and then operating within those guardrails. There are new risks that Gen AI is bringing to the table, and then there are some old risks that are being amplified. Clearly, impaired fairness, IP infringement, privacy concerns are all risks that have been amplified by Gen AI. Certainly, being able to explain models as a banker is super important, and we are glad to see how different companies are actually pushing the envelope a bit in terms of how they embed explainability into the models, and certainly security and ESG have been top of mind for most banks today. In the case of McKinsey, the way that we've designed our solution ensures that none of our data, none of our proprietary data is ever used to train LLMs, but also provides us access, to external LLMs as necessary to help infuse better knowledge onto our professional staff. Now, as I said earlier, being able to successfully deploy, and Yaron is going to spend a lot more time on this topic, being able to deploy this capability at scale requires a lot more than an understanding and usage of the underlying large language models and foundation models. The way that you strategically position the capability within the enterprise, the way that you build the right data architecture, and how you build the cloud scaffolding that's going to support it so that it can be kind of infinitely scalable. The way that you develop sensible UX and UI applications to facilitate the ease of use, but more importantly, the way that you actually change internal processes and raise the capability of your people are going to be, as big or bigger drivers of your eventual success than the actual models themselves. So at this point, we'll take questions at the end, but we wanted to do a quick poll, and then we'll hand it over to Yaron. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Larry, for the comprehensive overview and these great examples. It's really incredible to see what financial service organizations are doing with Gen AI right now. We're just going to pause quickly to take our first poll, and we would love to get your thoughts and to hear from you where you are on your Gen AI journey. So please do let us know. Are you just learning about Gen AI? Do you have a specific use case? Have you begun building an AI app, or do you have an app in production? And as I mentioned earlier, we'll share the results with all of you at the end. It's always of interest, I know. We'll just give it another couple seconds for anyone who still wants to participate. Please go ahead and mark your answers. We're just going to give it 3 more seconds, and we'll move on to Yaron.
Thanks, Sahar. So let's move to the first slide. So Larry talked about all the use cases and where we are seeing interest in financial services. Now let's focus on how we build the solution properly. What we've been seeing across the board, across different clients, is that they all focus on building the prototype. You take some LangChain, you take some notebooks or some interactive apps, APIs for OpenAI and so on. You build a demo of an application that does question and answering, or some expert or chatbot, and so on. After you finish this prototype and you show the lovely demo to the CIO or CEO and everyone is happy, you figure out that you have to build more seriously for production and be able to put guardrails and manage risk and increase the accuracy to a level that won't embarrass you, and so on. And this is really where you need to move from this prototyping and refactor the app to something that's production worthy. And this is where you have essentially those three different pipelines. One is the data pipeline. How do you manage the ingestion of documents and content that you want to index and use later, version it, control the metadata, and so on. How to test models. I've been asking people, how do you test your LLM models, and saying, oh, how do we in production? No? And the right approach would be to have a test set of, for example, example questions, example answers, and verify that. I've seen recently some blog posts and notes on that people just, OpenAI changed a model and it broke prompt for different people for their applications. So it's quite essential, even when you rely on a commercial LLM, to make sure before you switch versions that you actually test what you're doing. And finally, you need to build application pipelines that traverse through different states. We'll look into an example in a minute. And not less important is to monitor and govern everything. So collect telemetry data from all those different pipelines and be able to analyze that you're not generating risk, that the quality of the application is high, and potentially even generate feedback so you can further improve the application performance. Next, Sar. So we're essentially talking about four different elements in every GenAI application. One is the data ingestion pipeline, essentially taking raw content, document, online data, and so on, doing various transformations to clean, to de-risk the data, and index it in various type of storage, vector databases, documented databases, and so on. The next element is testing the application, the model, the prompts and everything. In some cases, you even fine-tune the model. You take a baseline model in order to improve the accuracy or the dialect or the language of the model. You actually give it additional data and you train it to be more specialized. But anyway, you have to do evaluation, testing, automated deployment, rolling upgrades, roll back in case there are failures. So this is done in the deployment and testing phase. You have the application pipeline. So here is a simplistic application pipeline. You get a request, you have to enrich the data, contextualize it, do the prompt engineering, call the LLM, potentially through some gateway or some governed access. So you can log all the different access, you can monitor, you can do FinOps on that, and you have some post-processing. We'll get into a more detailed example in a minute. And the application generates a lot of telemetry data, and this telemetry data is used to, again, to govern, to control, to see that everything is working great. But you can actually take the actual data from production and do some labeling on it and use it to fine-tune the model to improve it further, to generate better accuracy and better results over time. So this is the overall architecture that will apply to almost any type of application in GenAI. Next, Sar. So one of the key things in GenAI applications is the introduction of risk and also the aspect of low quality. We've seen some projects where everyone is happy, they measure the quality or the accuracy, and sometimes it's 50% accurate. So when you do the demo and you get some answers and you're all happy about it, you sometimes neglect the not so great answers. But when you go to production, you can allow yourself to have 10% of the answers hallucinate or be inaccurate. So you have to improve the quality, and you need to put controls in those different elements that I mentioned before. So when you ingest data, you have to cleanse the data, you have to deduplicate the data, you have to do all sorts of structuring on the data in order to make sure that the results will be more accurate and reduce risks, like potentially injecting private data into the information. Also, the testing, we talked about it a minute ago. You have to apply a lot of different testing before you deliver something to production to make sure you put the right controls and you don't, again, generate unnecessary risk. In the application pipeline, you have two control points. One is when you get the question, making sure, for example, the question is not toxic, is not introducing some malicious or harmful injection into your application. And also when you answer, you need to validate that you're providing proper answer that, again, doesn't expose unnecessary risk, unnecessary private data, and so on. And the final control area is in the monitoring to essentially build dashboards that can see in real time what is the accuracy of the models, do they behave, do we introduce unnecessary risk, do you have bias, and so on. These are all things that we can monitor in production. So these are things that you need to remember when you're building the application, not just focus on the application itself, but also all those control layers. Next, Star. One of the most critical thing is the data ingestion, data pipeline. The most trivial thing you see most people do is just like uploading a PDF document to a vector database, and they think they're done with it. What do you do when you need to upgrade the version of that document? How do you make sure that the system control that? Or how do you take into account some data that's junk, like ads or maybe symbols or things that are not really contributing to the answer? So we need to clean the data. We may need to remove data privacy problems from the data, essentially anonymize sections of the data. We do things like deduplication to improve the accuracy of the response. So these are what you see here is a set of examples of different transformations that you can do on the data. In traditional machine learning, you have structured data and you do things like select and filter and join and group by. But when it's NLP, when it's textual data, you need to do different transformations that are more oriented toward natural language processing. Actually, some of those processing are deep learning themselves, some of those functions that you do here. So when we build this ingestion pipeline, we need to think first on a way to host those pipelines. So there are different data pipeline technologies like Airflow, Kubeflow, and so on. You need to build all those pipelines with automation around them, scheduling every time document ingest and so on. And you need to build those transformations into the pipeline. The final aspect is how do you really manage all the metadata? So versioning of content, labeling of content. Think of it more as a data lakes for your unstructured data that need to be managed. So this is just an example of how to think about data and not neglect that aspect. Next. So just an example application of ingesting data. Let's assume I have a document. The document contains some symbols that don't really contribute to the language understanding. So the first thing we do is filtering. The second element is deduplication, so we don't have overfitting or we don't have accuracy problems on the data. We may want to reduce privacy by substituting entity names and social security numbers and so on with masked data. Then we need to do things like tokenization, and finally we index that in the vector database. So this is an example of a data pipeline that will be used in a GenAI application. Next. So this is an example of an application, and I'll demonstrate in a minute. So you have all the different elements I talked about a second ago. So this is an example of an agent, an intelligent agent that accepts questions. Those questions could be different types of questions that address different data corpus, different index data that sits in the vector database, and maybe some state. So let's assume you're a bank. So a state could be, I want to know what's my bank sort of balance. That will actually be translated to a SQL query against your user data and respond, oh, you know what, you have a $200 plus on your account. So that's a structured question. But you may have unstructured questions like, what are the different credit plans that the bank has to offer, or which one is better, or what are the different loans you can offer me, etc. So you may have question and answers on top of different data collections, let's call them. And there could be different data collections, like one around loans, one around credit, one around some general information, and so on. So when we get the question, the first thing we need to do is classify what did the user mean. Did he want to go for loans or credit, or maybe ask about the balance? So we need some classification mechanism. One of the challenges with those classification mechanisms, they know how to classify a question. What happens when you have an history? I'm asking you know what, I want to know about credit plans, and maybe the next question would be which one is better. So what did I refer to? I refer to, I want to know which credit plan is better. So I need to essentially compose the different elements in the history of the session into one question that will be classified, because otherwise I may not classify the question correctly. So when you look into this pipeline, first you have the data ingestion elements that I mentioned before. So we take the data, we transform, we store it in different data stores. Maybe information about user is stored in a SQL or NoSQL database. There may be some structured data, and the vector data, the unstructured data is stored in a vector database. And in the application pipeline, the first thing that we do, we get a request, we contextualize the request. Who's the user? Maybe we want to know information about the user, like features, like is it a male or a female? What's the account balance, etc., in order to be able to provide better answers. So the first thing that we need to do is fetch the user information. Next, we need to fetch session information. We want to know what's the historical information, what is the current state of the session that we're engaging with the user, and so on. Once we have it, we want to do what is referred to as refinement with history. So we want to take the different questions he was asking during the session and generate one holistic question. We'll see that in a second. Then we classify it into what does he really want? He want to search documents, he want to get account balance, what kind of document? So we are essentially selecting the different path or chain. Within every chain, we have its own sort of pipeline. So maybe we're asking a document in order to improve the accuracy of the search in a document, we may want to extract entities or elements in the question. Like if I'm asking about a specific stock ticker, I can put a filter on the metadata on the vector database to only look at that specific stock. So then I improve my accuracy. And then we find the document, we convert the answer to a nice textual answer, and we respond, not before we monitor all those different activities. We make sure we don't have malicious answers, we're not exposing private data, and we also need to save the state. So this is an example of a real application pipeline. I'm going to demonstrate that in a minute. And we also mentioned that there is all this sort of test pipeline, CI/CD, etc. Well, we want to, every time we change versions of data, versions of models, etc., we want to run testing and verify that we're not degrading the quality of our application or generating risks. And there's also the monitoring aspect that we mentioned. All the data from the application pipeline is fed through streaming into some monitoring dashboards, control center that will tell us that we're not, what's the performance, what are the risks, what's the bias, and so on. So again, this is an example of an application. Next. What you see here is a screenshot from an application we built with our service ops team. And this is a CodePilot. So one thing that you see is a chat that the AI or the LLM will immediately answer to the client. What we've seen is because it may introduce risks that the LLM may answer an answer that's not entirely accurate, there is this pattern of a co-pilot. So user asks a question, AI responds with a recommended answer, and the agent will essentially approve or edit that answer. Another thing that you could do, and what you see here, is that we contextualize the information. We know everything about the client that's currently, for example, calling the support line. So we know his balance, we know his historical conversations, we know he's a VIP or not, and so on. We know a lot of data. So we feed that data also as context into the LLM in order to get the best and most accurate response to the user. So this is just an example of an agent co-pilot application that we've been deploying with some clients. Next. Okay, so let me share my screen. Okay. Do you see my screen?
Yes, we see it.
Good. So what I'm going to do, I want to build a sort of an agent that answer questions on different financial data. So what I selected here, you can see in this document, it's a SEC filing of Uber, and could be many different companies, but I'll focus on this document to essentially generate questions and answers on that document. So we have an application. And essentially what we're doing, we can ask a question like, how is Uber revenue? So when we index the data, it goes into a vector store, as we mentioned before, and then the LLM can do what is referred to as a RAG and combine the data from the vector store with the LLM information and generate an answer. So in this case, we generate an answer saying the revenue for 2021, because it's a filing of 2021, was 17 something million dollars. Okay, and there's also a reference to the actual document where this information was retrieved. The next thing I'm doing is asking, did it improve over the years? Now, I didn't ask, did Uber revenue, did it? So the it essentially refers to Uber revenue. And I do get a nice answer that actually encompasses for both the previous question, Uber revenue, and did it improve over the years? And I get a nice answer. Yes, it did improve over those different years that the report is covering. So you see this trick of essentially being able to take the previous question and the current question and refine it is actually working. Let me show you the behind the scene aspects. So this is my my PyCharm window. It's sort of open on debug when I operated this query. So you see my question was, did it improve over the years? What we did is fetching the session. The first step was fetching the session. So we fetch the user features, a session, all sorts of state of the session. So from the session, we can actually see the historical questions that were stored in the database. We fetch them. And then what you see that what was generated before going to the LLM is this refined question. So the actual question that was sent to OpenAI wasn't did it improve over the years, was has Uber's revenue improved over the years. So we essentially took the historical data and the current question, and we generated, using an LLM, we generated a new question that encompasses for the history. So this is just showing you this trick of how to essentially build the pipeline in a more structured way. By the way, all of this is also controlled. There's, this application, we're going to also put it in the open source, has CLIs, and you could control, the ingestion pipelines. It has, all those management of collection and metadata and versioning of those data sets. It has the management of the sessions. If you want to ingest data, you just have a CLI command to ingest the data into a collection and so on. So you build a complete application that's not just about putting some in-memory vector store and running a prototype. It has everything to do with all those things I mentioned before, managing the data and the ingestion pipelines with their metadata, managing the user sessions, managing user features that could be ingested into the pipeline and generate more contextualized answers and so on. So this is, again, just an example of such an application. And again, we can follow up later if someone is interested to look into the more details on this implementation.
Thanks so much, Yaron, for that deep dive. That was fantastic. We're just going to pause quickly for another poll, and then we'll start to take questions. I see a lot of them coming into our Q&A panel. So now we want to hear from you. Where do you run your AI workloads today? Are you running them on cloud, AWS, Azure, GCP? Are you running them on-prem? Is it a hybrid configuration or an environment that includes both cloud and on-prem? Or some of you might not be running AI workloads at all. So please do let us know. We'd love to hear from you. And we'll just give it another 2-3 seconds. I see people are still filling in the polls. And in the meantime, I'd love to invite Larry back on stage to join Yaron and I, and we'll start to take your questions. Hey, Larry, thank you for joining us back. All right, and thanks everyone for filling in the polls. We will let you know the results at the very end of the session. So let's start with some questions. I see there's quite a few. I think we'll start with one for you, Larry. Sankar is asking, what are the key areas that will drive GenAI adoption in the financial industry in the next 1 or 2 years? Can you shed some light on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. We get asked all the time. Maybe I'll take it from a couple of different angles. I think adoption is there, right? I don't know of a single bank today that is not somewhere on the journey. The real question is how are they going to scale it into a production level capability that will actually deliver ongoing impact? And so a few things are going to be critical for that. Number one, institutions are going to have to get very comfortable with the guardrails that are applicable to them, so that they know which use cases they're going to be able to put into production. More importantly, though, banks are going to have to find ways of enabling their employees to massively increase the usage of these tools within the bank, and then find ways of getting their customers comfortable with the usages of these tools in things like service ops. We are seeing early signs that the momentum is building. And so at the end of the day, I don't think it's a matter of if banks are going to adopt, but a matter of how fast banks are going to adopt. And we're seeing this across the globe, not just in the US.
Definitely. Thanks so much, Larry. Anthony is asking, what models are 50% of technical builds being built on top of? What are some of the more popular models? Yaron, maybe you can take this one.
So, so most of the usage right now, we're seeing LLM models by those public providers like OpenAI mainly, and then Cohere and others. But we're seeing more and more models that are leveraging the open source models like, OpenLlama or Falcon or Mistral and others. We also see different types of models. Some models are, again, LLM, but we also seen vision models and audio models and transcription models and other models that are used as part of the application. We have a very popular application that is essentially analyzing client calls and generating a lot of insights from it. So this pipeline itself has about 7 different models in a single individual pipeline for converting audio to text, for cleansing audio, for LLM, for analyzing the text, and so on.
That's fantastic. Our next question is about Lily. How do we get access to Lily? I believe that's only internal for McKinsey at the moment, right, Larry?
Yeah. Lily is not for consumption outside the firm. That's the bad news. The good news is that it's been such a successful and popular capability that we've built, that we're actually using a lot of the learnings that we've had from building our own version of Lily, and we're working with lots of institutions for them to leverage as much of the scaffolding as they can to build their own, and so we're seeing it across all industries. But unfortunately, you cannot access Lily from outside the firm.
Maybe in the future, who knows?
Maybe.
This next question is for Yaron. What kind of technologies were used behind the scenes in the application that you were showing earlier?
So I think we marked it. You can open, if you can share the slide where I showed the pipeline. We actually have logos of tools near each one of them.
Yeah,
So for example, one of the nice things that we've done in this application, again, we'll share it open source, is that we decoupled all the different elements. So like the vector database is configurable, the SQL database is configurable, everything, the LLM is configurable all through very simple configuration. So there's no hard-coded element in any of the code. But what we've used and what I've shown is for vector database, because we're trying to build something that's not specific to one cloud, we use Milvus running on Kubernetes. We use MySQL for all the SQL data. MySQL or Redis for metadata. For the application pipeline, we use LangChain. We use MLRun, which is ours, and in order to do all the pipelines for the CI/CD and the data pipelines. So you can see all the different aspects here. We use Nucleo as an engine for serving the application pipeline.
That's great. Thanks, Yaron. And I'm loving this mix of technical questions and then also business questions. This next one, I think, is for you, Larry. A question about the talent. What is the talent? How about the talent, or what kind of talent is required to address the kind of growth of Gen AI in the financial industry? And what do you feel is going on in terms of the talent aspect?
Yeah, wow. I mean, talent is a big issue, not only in banking, I would imagine across the spectrum of industries. What we have found is that a lot of the traditional data science and sort of data engineering skills are relevant. But with the advent of the tuning of the models, some of the specific skills are on model fine-tuning, prompt engineering, even cloud enablement are in super high demand, and so there's not enough supply of talent for most institutions. So we're seeing a lot of the large and small banks building internal university-like structures to allow their employees to upskill into some of these areas. This is not unlike what we saw, call it 5 or 10 years ago with Python and sort of some of the newer open source languages back then. And we're seeing it again today. Tech talent is going to continue to be the big battleground in banking, in financial institutions. And so if you've got the right degrees, God bless you, you're going to be quite busy for a long time.
Yeah, but maybe to add on Larry's point, this is exactly what we're doing now together in McKinsey. We have worked with all the different banks in terms of training their people on one end, teaching them the best practices to generate production application, as well as providing code pieces. So all those things about de-risking and PII protection, and all, we have ready-made components that we're providing the full source to the client. So this provides them a significant ramping up for their skills.
100%. Let's see, we have quite a few here. There's one about PII reduction. Maybe, Yaron, you can talk about that as well. What sort of PII reduction accuracy can one expect in the pipeline? What if no leakage is tolerable? What would you suggest?
So first, if you look into the MRN Functions Hub, you'll actually find a function for PII removal. It uses several deep learning models and NLP models to do things like entity detection. It's not, you can't just do regex, because you need to understand from the sentence what's a name, what's an email. It depends on the context. The same word could be a name of someone, could be just a verb. So there are different models there that know how to identify different patterns of like emails, credit cards, names, and so on, and substitute them with an anonymized version of those elements, including generating proper reporting for all that data.
Absolutely, that's critical for sure. Another question about the organizational aspect. Who is the champion for these types of activities in the organization? And how do you get over the hump of the hype cycle critique? Larry, do you want to take this?
Yeah, I can take a stab at that. Establishing the right operating model is becoming quite important. What we have seen over the last 15 years is that as banks have become much more data and analytic proficient, they've also federated a lot of the data and analysis that's used, so that they can get those teams as close to the, to the customers as possible. What we're seeing today with GenAI and AI is a bit of a shift more towards the middle, where for certain functions that are new, that are quite advanced, that they're building more of a central team, typically being led by the chief analytics officer or somebody with, within that group, but very, very closely aligned to business line leaders. The institutions that start building POCs as shiny objects without a real buy-in from the business are finding that they're getting no momentum at all. In other words, they have great examples of experiments, but without a business line that is willing to go the journey and actually help implement and deploy into their own business lines. They're not getting, a lot of traction. So we tend to see, more centrally led teams with GenAI, which is not a surprise given all the new guardrails and the new governance that has to be established. But then we have to see a very tight alignment with the business or with the specific tech and ops functions to make sure that, that there's not only buy-in, but there's going to be, through the cycle support from both a change management perspective as well as an adoption perspective.
That's a great point. And maybe to build on that, there's another question here about how McKinsey handles it. In the technical builds done with clients from McKinsey, is the expectation that clients manage the service after the engagement, or does McKinsey provide managed services as well?
No, typically when we get involved in a build effort, we want to make sure that the client is sort of sitting side by side our team, and we have this philosophy of learn one, build one, teach one, right? So for the first POC, you might have a team that's learning how to build them. For the next POC, that team might be working side by side our teams. For the third POC, then that team becomes the driver and the teacher. So over time, we are delighted when we see our clients really kind of take hold of the applications, which we would eventually hand over to them, after the MVP or after our clients put them into production.
Thank you, Larry. A question for you, Yaron. Apart from English for these use cases that we described earlier in the webinar, which other languages do you support today?
So essentially support whatever the client needs. We have projects in Turkish, in Arabic, in Portuguese, in Spanish, in Hebrew, and in English, also in Norwegian. And we're using various tricks to deal with those languages. Some cases we do translation to English and back. Some cases we fine-tune the models for the language to make them more proficient in a specific language. One example we encountered in a user engagement where we didn't anticipate, like in certain languages, a name, a family name or a personal name may be a verb in a different language. So if you're just using a simple translation, that may not work. It may require further work, like fine-tuning the model and teaching it that it's actually names and not verbs.
And we'll maybe take one last question because we're nearing the end of our session. There's a question here about privacy, which I think is a big kind of concern, probably for everyone on the line. Can you say a couple words about how companies can think about data privacy, what kind of tools they can put in place, and how they can really mitigate that risk? Question for either of you. I think you both have.
Yaron, I'll let you lead and I'll call a comment. This is your domain.
By the way, I'm covering it quite extensively on my book, so feel free to read.
Buy the book.
Buy the book, yes. But again, there are there are several things that you want to avoid risk. I think the biggest one right now is the accuracy and hallucination. It's still an area that there are not very good solutions, and how do you automatically identify hallucination of a model? There's something called LLM as a judge. There for different application patterns like RAG, you have a way to do comparisons between the document and the answer. For summarization, there are specific solutions. But still, we've seen a lot cases where you have to put human in the loop to evaluate certain portions of the answers or suspicious answers, and be able to label them and further tweak them. Also, that part is around hallucination. We have the aspects of data privacy, and we have the deprivacy aspects of filtering. We have elements of things like bias that's being introduced. If you train the model with bias toward a certain population, obviously it will be biased in its answers. So again, we have many different such aspects.
Anything you'd like to add, Larry, from your perspective?
I think you covered it well, Yaron. Thank you so much.
Fantastic. Thank you both. So as promised, we're just going to share the poll results now. And thanks again, everyone, for participating. We'll just take a look at the first poll. The first one was, where are you on your GenAI journey? 38% of you are just learning about GenAI, which makes a lot of sense. It's a brand new topic for all of us, really. I mean, a year ago, where were we and where are we now? 29% have begun building an AI app, which is fantastic. 20% have a specific use case, and 13% actually already have an app in production, which is amazing. We'll take a look at the poll number 2. Where do you run your AI workloads today? 28% of you are on AWS, 25% don't run AI workloads at the moment, 15% are hybrid, 14% on Azure, 8% GCP, and 11% on-prem. Really, really interesting to see. And with that, I wanted to invite you to take a look at our MLOps page for additional resources such as these. We have previous recordings of MLOps live webinar sessions with industry experts talking about different aspects of bringing data science to production and seeing real business value with AI. We've got a lot of blogs there as well, and videos and tutorials, so we really invite you to take a look. Iguazio.com/MLOps, you can find all of that there. And for those of you who we didn't reach your questions, feel free to join our MLOps live community, and we can continue the conversation there. We can try to get back to you for any questions that we might have missed, and we'll share the link in the chat box again right now. And with that, I wanted to thank Larry and Yaron so much for this fantastic and fascinating conversation and looking at all the different aspects of implementing GenAI for financial services. And thanks everyone for joining us, and the team working behind the scenes, Edith, Idan, and everyone else. Really, really appreciate it. And we're excited to keep the conversation going and to hear from you going forward. Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Thanks.